Hi, my name is Abineet. I'm going to talk about ransomware today. So diving into it. All right, what is ransomware? So ransomware is a malware that has been pretty common and prevalent it's been around for a while, but we've seen the explosion of ransomware since about 2016. And I think right now the reason why ransomware is so popular is because of the explosive growth within cryptocurrencies. So here we have Liam Neeson, who's just had his file system hacked by CryptoKitty, who's demanding lots and lots of Bitcoins in return. So diving into ransomware, what is kind of the general steps? So when we look at ransomware starts with finding vulnerabilities within a system, infecting that system through some type of malware deployment, encrypting the file system, notifying the user or the owner of that system that your files have been encrypted and your system is compromised, demanding a ransom or a payment, usually in the form of cryptocurrencies, and then decryption of those files by giving a key, or if you don't comply, deletion of those files after a certain time period. So when we look at it, ransomware is on the rise. Symantec states that 241,000 variants of ransomware emerged in 2016 alone, and since last June of 2017, we saw 176,000 variants of ransomware, which is continuously growing. Targets and primary stakeholders are going to be hospitals, autonomous vehicle systems, power grid and critical infrastructure, and IoT devices. So ransomware is a global epidemic. Predominantly, the United States has been a big target of ransomware schemes, with 29% of all ransomware attacks emerging in our nation, followed by a high number in Japan with 9%, and then a bunch of other companies and organizations in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. I'll talk later about how countries like Ukraine and Russia have been exposed to different types of ransomware scams that have been pretty drastic. So when we kind of look at ransomware, what motives come into play? So really the biggest thing about ransomware that differentiates from other types of malware is that when you look at malware deployment in a lot of systems, those malware try to stay hidden on a system and keep collecting certain types of information, or wait till a kill switch is activated to perform either a botnet attack or a denial of service. But ransomware is kind of unique in the other hand, where once a file system and a program is compromised, it immediately alerts its user saying that, here you go, your file system has been infected and we want to collect payment in return. So it's very blatant and explicit compared to other types of malware that we see. And this is because the goal of ransomware is to immediately get some type of transaction or payment, and it's a really profitable mechanism, because if you attack a critical infrastructure, say like a hospital or telecommunications, and you compromise a multi-million or billion-dollar system, those organizations are going to be like, screw it, we're going to just pay your ransom because it's easier for us to deal with this situation than to go and find a potential key or a way to decrypt the malware itself. So immediate profitability makes this malware so popular. And not only that, we noticed that ransomware as a service is going to be exploding as well. You can actually buy ransomware deployment kits and set up ways to attack different organizations. So the authors of the malware itself are separating their systems from people who are actually buying the malware and deploying it for their own personal use. So going into it, ransomware, there are some existing products that you can actually buy from the darknet market today. Some of these include Sempado, which is an early variant of now what is known as Philadelphia. All these types of viruses have varying levels of tiers and feature sets, and you essentially pay more for more features you want. So for example, Satan, which is one of the existing products on the market, actually sets up an automation scheme for your ransomware. So it'll do all of your payment collections, it'll manage the key distributions, and it'll essentially take a cut 30% cut of whatever ransomware revenue that you collect. A lot of these, some of these services actually come with videos, and I was trying to find one, but YouTube had taken one down for Raspberry, and how to set up and how to deploy these systems. So as you can see, you can essentially buy a ransomware kit for X amount of dollars, and if you had a malicious intent against some organization, either from an internal dispute or from a other motive, you can actually buy these kits and deploy them yourself without having to actually develop the malware, which is pretty dangerous. So I'm going to talk about kind of the most infamous ransomware attack, WannaCry. So we saw WannaCry explode last year around May. And what WannaCry did was it took advantage of a zero-day exploit known as Eternal Blue. And so Eternal Blue is essentially an exploit found with the SMB or server message block to essentially invalidate that the way those IPs spread. So what it'll do is it went into SMB, it essentially found out how what computers were connected. And then not only that, it found related IP addresses that it used to spread the malware to varying networks and subnets. So this 0-day was leaked by shadow brokers last year as well in the famous NSA leak. And about 1 month before Eternal Blue was patched, this 0-day was exploited. So far, we saw that 300,000 computers were infected, and about $140,000 was collected in Bitcoin. And now, the way this attack actually was stopped was by kind of a problem from the developers who did make WannaCry. What they forgot to do is that they actually set it up. They didn't set up proper Bitcoin wallet transaction methods, and they had 3 hard-coded Bitcoin wallets. Essentially, what that caused is that when this ransom did affect a lot of computers and people did comply to those ransomware requests, WannaCry was not able to completely validate some of those transactions. So they pretty much didn't actually decrypt a lot of files for people as well. And this also created a really big hotspot in the public blockchain transaction where these 3 accounts were continuously collecting payments, and so it kind of made a limelight. But then funds were actually taken out around the time of August last year. Not only that, the developers left a really obvious kill switch for the malware itself. So people that broke down a lot of the code that was in WannaCry found that there was a empty value for a domain that essentially was acting as a stop to the ransomware constantly deploying. This value was changed with some domain, and it had temporarily stopped the malware from spreading even more. All right, so now moving forward, I'm going to talk about Petia, which is also another really big ransomware scheme that's also similar to WannaCry, but different in the way the methodology worked of attacking the system. So we saw that 0-day exploit of Eternal Blue was the same used exploit, and this malware was deployed via Trojan. So essentially, this Trojan was deployed on Medoc, which is a Ukrainian tax and finance accounting software. And essentially, once this ransomware was deployed, what it did was it accessed an ARP cache and different various Microsoft and Windows protocols to consistently spread the malware. So, and what was also different with Petia versus ransomware was that this is actually more of like a cyber terrorist attack, as a ransom wasn't demanded, but it was more on just disrupting those file systems and critical infrastructure within Ukraine. So we can see that this was probably performed either by some nation states. Could be speculated that Russia could have done this. But again, we noticed that ransomware now can actually be used not only to just get transactions from victims, but also can be used to completely cripple and shut down systems if someone had a malicious enough intent to do so. And then I'm going to talk now about a variant of Petia called BadRabbit. And so essentially, BadRabbit functions in the same way as Petia does, but it didn't just target Ukraine. It was deployed in various parts of Western Europe as well as Eastern Europe. This attack was primarily focused on metros, other media outlets, and various telecommunications industries in Russia, as well as Ukraine. This ransomware scheme actually did demand payment this time, which was 0.5 Bitcoin. And now, since half a Bitcoin is worth roughly $5,600, which is quite a bit of money. And so as you see, with cryptocurrencies constantly growing in demand and in price, ransomware is going to be a pretty potent attack strategy of gaining quick money. So when we dive into it, the way we mitigate threats is consistently keeping our applications updated. Windows patches are really annoying. I hate updating Windows, but it's something that needs to be done, as Windows will try to assess those risks immediately. WannaCry actually spread from Windows XP. Even though Windows XP isn't supported anymore, Microsoft had to roll out a lot of emergency patches to tackle that zero-day exploit. So consistently being vigilant with your updates as developers, trying to find bugs, patch them, take care of them immediately, and then not falling prey to phishing. A lot of ransomware will be deployed also through phishing simulations and attacks. A big threat vector is also Microsoft Word through its macros, and malware can spread through that way. So the deployment mechanisms of malware is pretty unanimous across, and ransomware does fall into this, but the only thing is that ransomware immediately takes an action and essentially cripples your system. And yeah, so I hope you protect your coins and your crypto kitties, especially as we move into this market and see potentially more threats coming along. Any questions?